Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Right now, I want to talk a little bit about Senator Mike Gravel. The year is 2019, and there was talk about Mike Gravel running for the presidency, the former senator from Alaska, someone who's 88 years old, hasn't been in the Senate since 1981, but at the same time, two teenagers got behind a movement to sort of convince Mike Gravel to become one of the candidates, to announce his candidacy for the presidency to challenge Donald Trump. Openly on Twitter, they talked about how the objective is not to win, it's just to bring ideas to the podium. That's very typical with many presidential candidates, actually, but what makes Mike Gravel different? Why mention anything about him at all? Mike Gravel is a candidate who has a platform that is completely contrary to the establishment, to things, what you could call them the oligarchs, the people in power, our current system, our current status quo. Some of the things about Mike Gravel are just all about empowering the citizens, the populace, the people, the voters, and actually raising attention and awareness to things associated with benefiting these people. I mean, so many of our policies are just favoring elites. They're favoring the haves instead of the people who are trying to get out of the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle. Let's talk about some of these things right now. Mike Gravel is someone who's called for direct democracy. Very specifically, he's talked about having people vote on constitutional amendments. He's like, we have 27 amendments to the Constitution, right? Not once did they ever have a national referendum on one of them, where it's like, people vote in a yes or no fashion, like, do you support Amendment 28, yes or no? And he was also the first one that I ever heard come up with a system where if you vote, you should vote on a paper ballot, and then later that night you go back to your home and you can check your name, birth date, and district or polling place, and you could see, was your vote cast properly? And like he says, it's not a perfect system, as long as there's not like a John Q. Smith in your district, that's your name, that has your exact same birth date, then you'll get the correct answer. Name, district polling place, and your birth date, and you'll be able to see if your vote was cast properly. All of these things are talking about benefiting the citizens. And before you say anything about Mike Gravel's policies, or you say anything about his character, or you bring up that he talks about UFOs from time to time, let's expand the national conversation to someone who is simply just trying to bring more power to the people. Power to we the people used to be a campaign slogan. Well, that's what's kind of going on right now, and that's why these two teenagers really got behind Mike Gravel, because they wanted to have a candidate that isn't exactly just saying things that are going to be raising awareness of the same old policies. Right now we're having a conversation in America all about, do we go to universal health care? Do we keep our current system? Do we become more free market? Guess what? They always have these conversations come election time. But when we actually want to talk about the things that Mike Gravel has mentioned, it's quite a different platform. Things like direct democracy, as well as seeing your votes cast properly. Mike Gravel has always been somewhat of an anti-establishment candidate. I am fully aware that politicians are not to be trusted, no matter who they are, or what side of the aisle that they represent, no matter which party they belong to. It's not so much about trusting the individual as a politician. It's about looking at the ideas that they are espousing and what is actually happening that will benefit people along the way. Let's face it, politics is a corrupt game. Politicians are often disingenuous. Politicians are often not telling the truth. You ever heard that? Politicians tell lies? But where can you find the people that are actually going to help others along the way? And what I can say about Mike Gravel's candidacy so far, about having these conversations about Mike Gravel, is that the establishment is afraid of him to no end. I started listening to those podcasts from 538, like the political polling website. They don't actually host their own polls. They just kind of get the data from other polls and they kind of present it. I learned that from their podcast, and they talk a lot about people, what they're doing in the polls. They never mention Mike Gravel, at least in the many episodes that I've heard. And you might be thinking, well, that's because his poll numbers aren't high, right? Oh yeah, but you're going to talk about John Hickenlooper You're going to talk about Michael Bennett, but you weren't going to mention Mike Gravel. This is just an opportunity that we can really look to recognize that there is an establishment. I'm not necessarily going to go down a New World Order, ancient oligarchy pathway right now, but there is an establishment in the United States of America. And when you sort of talk about empowering the masses, or you at least want to look at what benefits more citizens as opposed to only what benefits a few, they're going to be very afraid of Mike Gravel's platform. I also learned some things about Mike Gravel that, even just like glancing at the material written about him, of course he was ex-military, but stationed in Germany for a while. But one of the things that I did not know is that he used to work in counterintelligence and was actually infiltrating the French-speaking communist rallies in Canada, in Quebec, because Mike Gravel's parents, of course, are French-Canadian, and he would sort of infiltrate the French-Canadian communist rallies as kind of like part of counterintelligence work. Also, if you want to talk about being just like trying to go against the tide, there's something there, just kind of an interesting factoid. The communist movement in Canada really doesn't seem like it's faded away. I was in Montreal last October, and they just have posters all up over in multiple languages, English, French, even Arabic, talking about join the Communist Party and stuff like that. Still seems to be going as of now. But when we want to examine some of the things associated with Mike Gravel's platform, he's been very pro-marijuana, which once again, that benefits the citizens as opposed to the establishment. So many people got locked up for carrying a handful of joints or something in their pocket, whereas, it's like, not exactly you could call it a victimless crime even. That was all about the prison industrial complex, benefiting the establishment. Prisons are a business, prisons are for profit. It is the prison industrial complex. Even if you just do not smoke marijuana, I do not smoke marijuana. I have never once smoked marijuana, but it's like, one of the things that people are recognizing is too many people got locked up for just possession of marijuana, which is a much less harmful substance than some of the other things out there. And guess what? One of the reasons why they were getting locked up is because of these for-profit prisons that were going on. The establishment was benefiting from that. Financial elites were benefiting from that. And it's always good to have these conversations about what can benefit the citizens more and the establishment less. What benefits the many and what does not benefit the few. So when we're actually looking at the candidacy of Mike Gravel, he openly says he's not trying to win. Is it actually very likely that he's going to rise in the polls very much? Not exactly, but if you're going to be talking about other people, like, say, for example, Mayor Bill de Blasio, or if you're going to be talking about other people who are going to be polling at 0.5% in the polls, but they wouldn't mention somebody like Mike Gravel, or they wouldn't mention the ideas that have been put forward. A very interesting thing that comes from the Mike Gravel campaign is that Mike Gravel said very clearly that he wants to abolish ICE. He's not the first person to say that. The Democratic Socialists of America were talking about that for quite some time. What do you really make of that, of trying to abolish ICE? I'm not going to lie to you. I see this one straight down the middle. Of course, the conservatives are just sort of like, you absolutely cannot abolish immigration and customs enforcement. We can't live without it. Well, the other side of the coin is that ICE was created like around the time of the Department of Homeland Security, after September 11, 2001. One of the things that was, ICE was created as an agency at that time, so we definitely went many years without ICE. But on the other hand, like, there's the sort of tax Wall Street party approach where they're like, hey, wait a second, we don't have to abolish ICE, we just have to reform the system or just recognize where the problems are within this agency and just kind of scale back the role. It doesn't have to be abolished completely, because what they're trying to say is that immigration, customs enforcement is actually doing some good. We need to find the good things and then eliminate the bad things. Mike Gravel is for the abolishment of ICE. And I'm not going to lie to you. I see both sides of the coin. I see how this could be a beneficial thing if reformed. I repeat, if reformed. And I also see the benefits of abolishing this, whereas you could just sort of be like, hey, this agency is really crossing a lot of ethical lines. We can go about this in a different way. Absolutely, though, I mean, taking a step away from Mike Gravel now, just saying no open borders. And by that, what we mean is that most people, Democrat, Libertarian, Republican, Green Party, are not even for open borders. I mean, yes, you might hear one or two politicians talking about it. Even the Libertarians aren't really for open borders. I mean, what they wanted to do was privatize all of the land that was kind of along the border. I mean, just have it owned by private citizens, and then that person can decide about if they want to build some sort of security measure or have some security measures in place. Okay, away from that, back to Mike Gravel. He's the man of the hour. Mike Gravel is one of the few people who actually has somewhat of a libertarian and democratic platform together. And in 2008, when he was running for the presidency, he eventually conceded the Democratic nomination that he would no longer seek the nomination for the Democratic Party, that is, and tried to become the Libertarian nominee. That was like, a very kind of eye-opening experience for me. I learned that politics is not just left and right. I mean, there's so many people that fit into different ways, but Mike Gravel is someone who has libertarian ideas, but he also has democratic ideas. He's for Medicare for all. I mean, that's hardly a libertarian idea, but I mean, like he is now. But at the same time, we should see that what's the motivation for having some ideas that are democratic and some ideas that are libertarian? Citizen empowerment. That's why the title of his book was Citizen Power, a mandate for change. Because let's face it right now, our system is benefiting the elites. I heard an interesting fact once. I mean, like, it's kind of just more like someone's sort of argument rather than a fact. Why do we have the House and the Senate? Why do we have a bicameral legislature? Why are there these two houses of government? The House of Representatives is meant to represent the people, and the Senate is the buffer zone in between the voices of the people and the existing establishment. I mean, that's just like someone doing sort of a presentation on YouTube. I mean, you can take that for what you will. I guess, like I said, it's an argumentative statement rather than a pure fact. But look at it. The people in the House represent our districts. That's the thing that's done by population. Those are actually the representatives of the constituents. Whereas the senators are for the entire state. That's supposed to be the House that's done by equality. But in reality, things go through the House first, then they have to pass the Senate. The Senate is the buffer zone in between the voices of the people who are, having their representative in Congress and the other powers of government, the establishment, the existing governmental body. So what we're trying to say here is the system for the people, for the voters, who actually want to have change in the world, who don't just want to be talking about ideas, the system for people who actually want to see an improvement in the betterment of human life, this system sucks. It stinks. Because it's almost rigged against us. I mean, whereas you sort of see that things have to pass, first the House, then the Senate, and even the president can veto. Granted, there is some the balances of power, the checks and balance system, it's not evil. I mean, that actually comes to us even from a variety of sources, Machiavelli and Polybius and things of that nature. I mean, it's not based on nothingness, but at the same time, the way that our current system is designed, it's benefiting the elites, not the people. Well, I would just ask the question right now to the audience. What would you think about having a national referendum on a constitutional amendment? Like if we need amendment number 28, should the people vote on that in a yes or no fashion and then be like, if you get 51% of the people's vote, you put that into action? That's kind of what Mike Gravel talks about with direct democracy, one of his absolute biggest issues. Also, I mean, Mike Gravel is someone who put the Pentagon Papers into the public record. It's like, he does have a strong anti-establishment presence, even calling for investigations about what happened after 9/11. Of course, there was the 9/11 Commission report, whatever. We also had the Mueller report, whatever. Those are just watered-down versions of the truth. Those are things that are meant for nothing to happen. Did you really think that anything was going to happen after the Mueller report? The only thing I thought that was going to happen was talk, no change. The existing political body does not want to change. Why? Because the elites already have the power. And once again, elites does not mean New World Order, the globalists, the tyrants, the social engineers, the way that Alex Jones presents it. It means the existing political establishment wants to keep the voices of the people suppressed so they can have power for the few and power not for the many. Power not for the voters and the constituents and the people who are actually affected by the policies. The rich can adapt to most tax plans out there. Mike Gravel once supported the fair tax, the 23% national sales tax. And, that's a very bold move. Once I started listening to a lot of those things about it, where it's like John Linder did many presentations on it, Neil Bortz did a lot about it, because those were the guys who authored the thing. Gary Johnson also endorsed the fair tax in 2016, the 23% national sales tax, bringing the income tax to zero, abolishing the IRS, or 90% of the IRS anyway. The IRS would basically be turned into a mail processing room. I think that Mike Gravel is backing away from that because, the benefit of the fair tax was, firstly, it gives you a universal basic income check at the beginning of the month called a prebate. The second thing about it is that you're only taxed on the decisions that you make. Like, if you don't want to spend your money, you're not paid a tax on that. Whereas, if you receive a paycheck now and you just hoard the whole thing, you still paid the income tax. And people are just like, it's arguable. There are benefits to both systems. And once you actually hear the presentations on the fair tax, it's not as crazy as it sounds, because it's like, it's inclusive as well. Like, on your receipt, you'll see like where it is, but it's like, you'll just see $10 on the price tag, and you pay $10 at the register. The tax is completely built in and it's inclusive. So once you sort of break it down like that, people won't really notice as much. Whatever, that's just kind of a different conversation for a different time. Plus, if anyone's heard my previous uploads, they probably heard me say something about this. We talked a lot about the fair tax with Andrew Yang, and we don't really need to go back to all that again. But looking at some of Mike Gravel's other issues, I think that it's just any candidate that is actually going to be talking about things that are bringing a benefit to the average everyday citizen is going to be feared by the political establishment, where they want to keep the power for a few. I've said this very clearly on this channel. Oligarchy is a real thing. The few people want to keep everything for themselves. Why? Because that's kind of the nature of a ruling body. Power and concentrations of wealth are being kind of moved toward a very small group of people. And one of the problems with the Democrats is they don't tell you the motivation about why you care about income inequality. They just say, the rich aren't paying their fair share of taxes. Bernie Sanders is banging the drum. The rich aren't paying their fair share of taxes. But in reality, you have to recognize that large concentrations of wealth equal large concentrations of power, and that they can use that private entities and wealthy individuals can influence the public sector and move it toward their advantage. So all the money and the power stays in one group. It's not only that all the wealth is going to the top 1%, that's only half of the issue. It's that these people are also controlling the government and manipulating the scene and micromanaging the events so that it always comes out in their favor. Power and wealth only for a few, and then the majority of the people stay poor and stay powerless. So when somebody like Mike Gravel is running, I think it's a very good time to talk about this stuff, but I guess I've just thrown in 2 cents on the issue. What do you think about some of these things that Mike Gravel has talked about? Also, what do you think about some of the more extreme things that he has said, like about having, former senator question things like the events of 9/11, just saying like, it's possible that a government was involved with this, meaning that not necessarily the United States government, but other foreign governments other than Afghanistan and Iraq. Mike Gravel is very anti-war. Anti-war candidates are also going to be feared to some extent. And even, what do you think about the fair tax? A national sales tax, 23% inclusive. You see $10 on the price tag. You see $10 at the register, unless the state wants to make the sales tax exclusive. But what do you think about any of these things that we've talked about with Mike Gravel? I would love to hear from you, and until next time.